Julian Vale only asked the most dangerous alpha in the city to pretend to be his date for one night. But by midnight, Adrian Crowe was holding his hand like he had no intention of ever letting go. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoy intense BL romance stories filled with tension, heartbreak, possessive alphas, and unexpected love. Now, let's begin. Part 1. Julian stood outside the glass tower of Crowe Industries, with the wedding invitation trembling between his fingers. Cream-colored paper. Gold lettering. A perfectly cruel little ribbon tied around the edge. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Marcus Elian and Theodore Hale. Marcus. His ex-fiancé. The alpha who had once promised Julian forever, then left him with nothing but a quiet apartment, a broken mating contract, and the kind of humiliation that followed an Omega everywhere. Julian had told himself he would not go. For 3 weeks, he had ignored the invitation sitting on his kitchen counter. He had buried it under unpaid bills, coffee mugs, and work documents. He had pretended the sight of Marcus's name did not still make his chest tighten. Then yesterday, Marcus had called. Not to apologize. Not to explain. He had called to say in that soft, polished voice Julian used to love, "I hope you'll come. It would look mature. Besides, I'd hate for people to think you're still heartbroken." That was when Julian decided he would attend. And he would not attend alone. The problem was that Julian had no boyfriend. No alpha. No one powerful enough to make Marcus regret speaking to him like that. Except one man. Adrian Crowe. 32 years old. Billionaire CEO. Dominant alpha. Cold, untouchable, and known for making grown men lower their voices when he entered a room. Julian worked 2 floors below Adrian's executive office as a contract design consultant. They had spoken exactly 4 times. Once in an elevator. Once during a presentation. Once when Adrian had caught Julian working late and silently placed a cup of coffee beside his laptop. And once when Julian had accidentally fallen asleep in a conference room, only to wake up covered by Adrian's suit jacket. Julian still remembered the scent on that jacket. Dark cedar. Expensive rain. Something dangerously warm underneath. He should have returned it immediately. Instead, he had kept it for 3 days before finally bringing it back, pretending he hadn't pressed his face into the collar like a fool. Now he was about to ask that same man the most ridiculous question of his life. The elevator opened on the top floor with a soft chime. Julian stepped out. Adrian Crowe's assistant looked up from her desk. "Mr. Vale? Do you have an appointment?" "No," Julian said, then immediately hated how small his voice sounded. He straightened his shoulders. "But it's urgent." The assistant studied him for a moment, then glanced toward the closed office doors. "He's between calls. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to ask an alpha billionaire CEO to be his fake date." Perfect. Julian walked into Adrian's office before his courage could die. The room was enormous, all black marble, steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Adrian stood near his desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms, phone in one hand, expression unreadable. He looked like a man who owned the world and found most of it disappointing. His silver-gray eyes lifted to Julian. "Mr. Vale." Julian's throat went dry. "Mr. Crowe." Adrian ended the call without saying goodbye. "You look like you're about to either resign or faint." "I'm not resigning." "Then sit before you choose the second option." Julian did not sit. If he sat, he would lose. He held up the wedding invitation instead. "My ex is getting married." Adrian's gaze moved from Julian's face to the invitation. Something subtle changed in his expression. Not sympathy exactly. Interest. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. Julian laughed once, sharp and embarrassed. "Don't be. He's awful." "That makes my apology unnecessary then." "It does." Silence stretched between them. Julian forced himself to continue. "He invited me because he wants to prove I'm still alone. He wants everyone to see that he moved on first. That he upgraded. That I'm still the poor little Omega he left behind." Adrian's eyes darkened. Julian looked down at the invitation before he lost his nerve. "So I need a date." Adrian said nothing. Julian rushed on. Not a real date. Obviously. Just for one evening. A public appearance. You don't have to do anything strange. Just stand beside me, maybe call me by my first name, and look mildly interested in my existence. Adrian leaned back against his desk. Mildly? Julian blinked. What? If I am your date, I refuse to look mildly interested. Julian's heart stumbled. Adrian's voice stayed calm. That would be bad acting. For a moment, Julian could only stare. Then he remembered how to breathe. So, is that a yes? Adrian walked toward him slowly. Julian had spent years around alphas. Arrogant ones. Charming ones. Cruel ones. But Adrian was different. His dominance did not crash into a room. It settled over it. Like winter. Like gravity. He stopped in front of Julian, and took the invitation from his hand. Their fingers brushed, and Julian's pulse betrayed him instantly. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. The wedding is this Saturday, Adrian said. Yes. At the Meridian Grand. Yes. Black tie. Yes. And you planned to ask me 2 days before? Julian swallowed. I panicked slowly. The corner of Adrian's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough to be dangerous. Then he said, I'll go. Julian froze. You will? Yes. No contract? No conditions. One condition. Julian's stomach tightened. What? Adrian stepped closer, close enough that Julian caught that cedar rain scent again. When we walk in, Adrian said quietly, you don't look at him first. Julian's voice came out softer than he intended. Who do I look at? Adrian's eyes held his. Me. The word sank into Julian's chest like a secret. He should have laughed. He should have made some nervous joke. He should have reminded Adrian that this was fake. But nothing about the way Adrian looked at him felt fake. Julian nodded. Good, Adrian said. Then he reached past Julian, opened the office door, and spoke to his assistant without looking away from him. Clear my Saturday evening. The assistant's eyebrows lifted, but she only said, Of course, Mr. Crowe. Julian should have left after that. He should have thanked Adrian and gone back downstairs before he did something humiliating, like smile too widely, or ask why his chest suddenly felt too full. Instead he stood there, clutching nothing now, feeling strangely exposed without the invitation in his hands. Adrian noticed that too. Julian. It was the first time Adrian had used his first name. Julian looked up. Adrian's voice lowered. At that wedding, no one will pity you. Julian's throat tightened. And no one, Adrian continued, will make you feel small while I'm standing beside you. Julian did not know what to say. Because Marcus had once promised to protect him too. But Marcus's promises had always sounded beautiful. Adrian's sounded like fact. 2 days later, when Julian arrived at the Meridian Grand in a tailored midnight blue suit, he found Adrian already waiting at the entrance. Black tuxedo. Silver cufflinks. Hair swept back. Eyes fixed on Julian like the entire city had disappeared behind him. Julian stopped walking. For one terrifying second, he forgot the wedding. Forgot Marcus. Forgot revenge. Adrian stepped forward and offered his arm. You're late, he said. Julian took it. You're early, Julian whispered. Adrian looked down at him. I wanted to be the first one to see you. Julian's heart slammed against his ribs. Before he could answer, the ballroom doors opened. Music spilled out. Laughter followed. And then Julian saw Marcus across the room, dressed in white, smiling like a prince in someone else's fairy tale. Marcus's smile faded the moment he saw Adrian Crowe's hand resting possessively over Julian's. Adrian leaned closer, his breath warm near Julian's ear. Remember, he murmured. Don't look at him. Julian's fingers tightened around Adrian's arm. Then, with every eye turning toward them, Julian lifted his face and looked only at Adrian. And Adrian smiled. Not politely. Not mildly. Like Julian had arrived as his. End of part 1. Part 2. The ballroom became quiet in a way that was almost beautiful. Not completely silent. The orchestra still played a gentle melody near the far wall. Glasses still chimed. A few guests still whispered behind raised hands. But the kind of attention that mattered had shifted. It moved away from the floral arch, away from the golden tables, away from Marcus Elian standing in his perfect white suit. It landed on Julian Vale. And on the alpha billionaire holding his hand like it belonged there. Julian could feel every stare on his skin. Some were curious. Some were shocked. Some were cruelly delighted, as if they had arrived expecting to watch an abandoned Omega suffer, and had suddenly been given a much better show. His grip tightened around Adrian's arm. Adrian noticed instantly. Without looking down, he placed his free hand over Julian's fingers. Warm. Steady. Possessive enough to make half the ballroom breathe differently. "Keep walking," Adrian said softly. Julian obeyed. Every step felt like crossing a battlefield. Marcus stared at them from across the room. At first, his expression was controlled. Then his eyes dropped to Adrian's hand over Julian's, and something sharp moved across his face. Recognition. Disbelief. Jealousy. Julian had dreamed, once, of seeing Marcus jealous. He had imagined it during lonely nights, during mornings when he woke up reaching for someone who had already left, during afternoons when mutual friends carefully avoided saying Marcus's name. But now that he saw it, he felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Exhaustion. Because Marcus had only wanted him when another alpha stood beside him. Adrian guided Julian toward the guestbook table. "Sign your name." Julian blinked. "What? You came here as a guest. Not as a ghost." The words hit deeper than Julian expected. For months after Marcus left, Julian had felt like something half-visible. Everyone knew what had happened, yet no one said it directly. They only looked at him with careful pity, as if heartbreak had turned him fragile. He picked up the pen. His hand shook once. Then Adrian's hand covered his wrist. Not stopping him. Anchoring him. Julian wrote his name. Julian Vale. Then Adrian took the pen from him and wrote beneath it. Adrian Crowe. A woman behind them gasped quietly. Julian almost smiled. Adrian did not. He looked completely calm, as if arriving at his employee's ex-fiancé's wedding as a date was something he did every Saturday. "Julian." That voice. Julian turned. Marcus was walking toward them. Up close, Marcus looked even more polished than before. Golden hair styled perfectly, blue eyes bright beneath the chandeliers, smile gentle enough to fool anyone who had never been hurt by it. "Marcus," Julian said. His voice did not break. That alone felt like a victory. Marcus's gaze flicked to Adrian. "Mr. Crowe, I didn't realize you knew Julian personally." Adrian's expression stayed unreadable. "You didn't ask." The air sharpened. Marcus's smile tightened. "I suppose I didn't." Julian could sense Marcus trying to understand. Trying to measure the distance between them. Trying to decide whether Adrian was a fake date, a real lover, or something worse. Something Marcus could not control. "You look well," Marcus said to Julian. Julian almost laughed. That was exactly the kind of sentence Marcus used, when he wanted to sound kind without being kind. "I am well," Julian replied. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, just enough that Julian knew he had noticed the difference. Before Marcus could speak again, a softer voice approached. "Marcus? The photographer is waiting." Theodore Hale stood beside him. The groom. He was handsome in a delicate, expensive way. Tall, elegant, dressed in ivory. An Omega from one of the oldest families in the city. The kind of Omega Marcus's parents had always wanted for him. Theodore looked at Julian with polite curiosity. Then he looked at Adrian. His eyes widened. "Mr. Crowe," Theodore said quickly. "We're honored you came." Adrian gave a faint nod. "I'm here for Julian." The sentence landed like a dropped glass. Julian stopped breathing. Marcus did too. Theodore's gaze moved between them, and something uncertain flashed across his face. Julian wondered what Marcus had told him. Probably that Julian was clingy. Too emotional. Too attached. Maybe that Julian had never understood when to let go. Maybe Theodore had arrived at this wedding believing Julian was a sad little piece of Marcus's past. Adrian had destroyed that story with 5 words. Marcus cleared his throat. That's unexpected. Adrian looked at him. Is it? There was no anger in his voice. That made it worse. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. Well, I'm glad Julian has someone supporting him. Today must be difficult. Julian felt the familiar wound open. There it was. The gentle knife. Marcus wanted everyone nearby to hear that Julian was suffering. But before Julian could answer, Adrian stepped closer. Difficult? Adrian repeated. Marcus's smile returned. Of course. Weddings can bring up memories. They can, Adrian said. But I doubt Julian came here to remember losing you. Theodore looked down. Marcus's face changed. Adrian continued, calm and merciless. From what I can see, he came here to realize how fortunate he was. The guests nearby pretended not to listen. They failed. Julian's lips parted slightly. Marcus stared at Adrian like he had been slapped. Then Adrian turned to Julian, his entire tone changing. Would you like champagne? The softness of it almost ruined Julian. Because Adrian had just defended him in front of the man who broke him, then asked him about champagne as if nothing had happened. Julian nodded. Yes. Adrian led him away before Marcus could respond. Only when they reached the drinks table did Julian release the breath he had been holding. That was. He searched for a word. Too much? Adrian asked. No, Julian looked at him. Perfect. Adrian handed him a glass. Their fingers brushed again. This time, Julian did not pull away quickly. Adrian noticed that too. For a while, they stood near the side of the ballroom, watching guests slowly return to their conversations. But now the whispers had changed. No one was asking why Julian had come alone. They were asking why Adrian Crowe had come with him. Julian should have been relieved. Instead, his mind kept replaying Adrian's words. I'm here for Julian. Not with. For. As if Adrian had chosen a side before the war even began. You're good at this, Julian said. At weddings. At making people nervous. Adrian looked into his glass. People are usually nervous because they know what they deserve. Julian studied him. There was something behind that sentence. Something older than tonight. Something Adrian did not show easily. Before Julian could ask, the music changed. Couples began moving toward the center of the ballroom. Marcus and Theodore stood beneath the chandeliers for the first dance, smiling for the photographer. Julian looked away too quickly. He hated himself for it. Adrian saw. Does it hurt? He asked. Julian considered lying. But something about Adrian made lying feel pointless. Yes, Julian admitted. Not because I want him back. I don't. I think it hurts because everyone acted like I was foolish for loving him. Like I should have known better. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said, loving someone who lied does not make you foolish. Julian's chest tightened. It makes them cruel, Adrian added. Julian looked up at him. The music filled the space between them. Adrian set his glass down. Then he offered Julian his hand. Julian stared at it. What are you doing? Dancing with my date. His date. Julian's heart beat too hard. We don't have to, he whispered. Adrian's eyes held his. I know. That was what made Julian take his hand. Adrian led him onto the dance floor. The moment they joined the others, the whispers rose again. But Adrian pulled Julian close enough that the world blurred at the edges. Julian had danced with alphas before. With Marcus, every step had felt like performance. Beautiful, controlled, always meant to be watched. With Adrian, it felt different. Protective. Private. Even in the middle of the ballroom, even with dozens of eyes on them, Adrian moved like the only person he saw was Julian. Relax, Adrian murmured. I'm trying. Try less. Julian huffed softly, almost laughing. Adrian's hand settled at his waist, firm but respectful. Julian's body betrayed him again, easing closer without permission. Across the room, Marcus watched. Julian felt it before he saw it. Adrian did too. His thumb brushed once, barely there, against Julian's side. "Don't look at him," Adrian said. This time, Julian did not need to be told twice. He looked at Adrian. The dance ended too soon. Applause filled the room for Marcus and Theodore, but more than a few people were still watching Julian and Adrian. Julian stepped back, breath uneven. Adrian did not release his hand immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked. Julian nodded. "I think so." But before Adrian could respond, Marcus appeared beside them again. This time, his smile was gone. "Julian," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Adrian's hand tightened slightly around Julian's. Julian looked at Marcus. For once, Marcus was not performing for the room. He looked angry. And worse, he looked unsettled. Julian should have refused. He should have stayed beside Adrian, where he felt safe. But a part of him, the wounded part, wanted to know what Marcus could possibly say now. So Julian lifted his chin. "Fine," he said. 2 minutes. Adrian looked at him. Julian expected him to object. Instead, Adrian leaned closer and spoke low enough that only Julian could hear. "If he says one thing that hurts you, call my name." Julian's heart twisted. Then Marcus led him toward the quiet hallway outside the ballroom. The moment they were alone, Marcus turned on him. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. Julian stared at him. For the first time all night, he smiled. "I was invited, wasn't I?" Marcus stepped closer. "Not like this." Julian's smile faded. There it was. The truth. Marcus had wanted him there. But only broken. Only lonely. Only small. And Julian suddenly understood that coming here with Adrian had not just changed how everyone saw him. It had changed how Julian saw himself. Before he could answer, Marcus lowered his voice. "You don't know what kind of alpha Adrian Crowe is." Julian's pulse slowed. Marcus looked toward the ballroom doors, then back at him. "He doesn't stay with anyone, Julian. He collects people when they interest him. Then he leaves them colder than he found them." Julian hated that the words landed. Hated that a small part of him wondered if Marcus was telling the truth. Then Marcus said the cruelest thing of all. "You were easy for me to leave. Don't make yourself easy for him too." For 1 second, Julian could not move. Then the ballroom door opened behind them. Adrian stood there. His eyes were fixed on Marcus. And this time, there was nothing calm in them. End of Part 2. Part 3. Adrian did not raise his voice. That was the first thing Julian noticed. He simply stood at the end of the hallway, one hand resting against the open ballroom door, his silver-gray eyes fixed on Marcus with a kind of cold focus that made the air feel thinner. Marcus turned pale for half a second. Then he recovered, because Marcus Elian had always been good at recovering in front of an audience. Even when the audience was only Julian. "Mr. Crowe," Marcus said, forcing a polite smile. "This is a private conversation." Adrian stepped into the hallway. "It stopped being private when you insulted my date." Julian's heart struck hard against his ribs. "My date? Again?" Marcus's eyes flicked toward Julian, then back to Adrian. "I was warning him." "No," Adrian said. "You were trying to make him feel unwanted because seeing him wanted makes you uncomfortable." The words landed with cruel accuracy. Julian stood frozen between them, his hands curled at his sides. He had imagined this moment differently. In every version inside his head, he had been stronger, sharper, ready to throw Marcus's words back at him. But hearing Marcus say he had been easy to leave had reopened something old and ugly. Adrian seemed to sense it. His gaze softened only when it moved to Julian. "Come here," Adrian said. "Not as an order. As an offer." Julian walked toward him. The moment he reached Adrian's side, Adrian did not grab him or pull him close for show. He simply lowered his hand between them, palm open. Julian looked at it. Then he took it. Marcus watched the gesture like it offended him. "You really think this is real?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. You think Adrian Crowe suddenly cares about an Omega he barely knows? Julian's fingers tensed. Adrian's thumb moved once over his knuckles. He doesn't have to explain what I am to him, Julian said. His voice surprised him. It was not loud. It did not shake. Marcus stared. Julian lifted his chin. And you don't get to decide how much I'm worth after throwing me away. For the first time that night, Marcus had no immediate answer. Adrian looked at Julian as if something inside him had shifted. Not amusement. Not pity. Respect. Marcus's jaw tightened. I didn't throw you away. Julian laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You ended our engagement in a message your assistant delivered. Adrian's expression went still. Dangerously still. Marcus glanced at him, and seemed to realize too late that some truths looked worse when spoken out loud. That was complicated, Marcus said. No, Julian replied. It was convenient. The hallway fell silent. From inside the ballroom, applause rose. Someone made a toast. Laughter followed, bright and distant, as if they were standing outside someone else's happiness. Marcus looked away first. Julian should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt tired. So tired that his bones seemed heavy. Adrian must have felt the tremor in his hand, because he turned slightly, shielding Julian from Marcus without making a scene. We're done here, Adrian said. Marcus's eyes sharpened. You don't speak for him. No, Adrian said. But I do stand with him. That sentence wrapped around Julian more warmly than any embrace. Adrian guided him back toward the ballroom. But before they entered, Marcus spoke again. Julian. Julian stopped, though Adrian did not let go of his hand. Marcus's face had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something Julian hated more. Regret. You know I loved you once, Marcus said. Julian closed his eyes for 1 second. Once, those words would have destroyed him. Now they only felt late. You loved how I loved you, Julian said. That's not the same thing. Then he walked back into the ballroom with Adrian beside him. The rest of the reception passed like a dream Julian could not fully enter. People approached them now, but differently. Earlier, they had come with curiosity disguised as politeness. Now they came carefully, as if Adrian's presence had rewritten Julian's value in real time. An older alpha from Marcus's family congratulated Julian on looking well. A woman Julian barely remembered from Marcus's charity circles said it was wonderful to see him again. Theodore's mother smiled at him with the careful discomfort of someone who had heard more than she wanted to know. Julian answered each person with calm grace. Adrian stayed at his side. Not too close. Never inappropriate. But always close enough that Julian felt his presence like a wall behind him. At dinner, they were seated at a table near the front. Julian realized, with a strange twist in his stomach, that Marcus must have planned it that way. Close enough for everyone to watch Julian's reaction during the vows. Close enough for pity. Instead, Julian sat beside Adrian Crowe, who cut through every awkward silence with effortless control. When someone asked how long they had known each other, Adrian answered, "Long enough to know Julian is difficult to impress." Julian nearly choked on his water. Adrian's mouth curved slightly. When another guest asked if they were serious, Julian panicked for half a second. Adrian looked at him first. A silent question. Julian understood. He could deny it. He could laugh it off. He could say they were only friends. Instead, he said, "We're taking our time." Adrian went very still. The guest smiled, satisfied, and turned away. Julian stared down at his plate, suddenly burning with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know why I said that." Adrian leaned closer. "I didn't mind." Julian looked at him. The noise of the room seemed to fade. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to Julian's mouth, then returned to his eyes. It was so fast Julian could have imagined it. Except he knew he had not. Before either of them could speak, the sound of a spoon tapping against glass filled the ballroom. Marcus stood at the center of the room for his speech. At his side, Theodore smiled with practiced elegance. Marcus thanked the guests, thanked his parents, thanked Theodore's family. Then his eyes found Julian. "And to the people from our past," Marcus said, voice smooth, "who helped us become who we are today. Some love stories end so better ones can begin." A few guests made soft, approving sounds. Julian felt the room turn toward him again. There it was. One last public cut. A beautiful sentence designed to make him the failed chapter in Marcus's love story. Julian's hand tightened under the table. Adrian stood. The room quieted instantly. Julian looked up, startled. "Adrian?" Adrian picked up his glass. His expression was calm. Too calm. "I'd like to add something," he said. Marcus's smile froze. No one stopped Adrian Crowe. Adrian looked around the room, then at Julian. "Some people mistake abandonment for growth," he said. "They believe leaving someone wounded proves they chose better." The entire ballroom went silent. Adrian continued, voice steady. "But sometimes the person left behind is not the tragedy of the story. Sometimes he is the only honest part of it." Julian could not breathe. Adrian turned his glass slightly toward him. "To Julian," he said, "for surviving what did not deserve him." No one moved. Then Theodore, unexpectedly, lifted his glass first. A second later, others followed. Julian stared at Adrian, overwhelmed and terrified by how much he wanted to believe this was not only an act. Marcus sat down slowly, his face unreadable. Adrian returned to his chair. Julian whispered, "Why did you do that?" Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Then he said the one thing that made Julian's heart forget how to protect itself. "Because I meant it." End of Part 3. Part 4. Julian could not look away from Adrian. The ballroom around them continued moving, glittering, breathing. Guests whispered behind crystal glasses. The orchestra began another slow song. Marcus's wedding continued as if Adrian Crowe had not just raised a toast that turned Julian from a pitted ex into the center of the room. But for Julian, everything had narrowed to one sentence. "Because I meant it." Adrian sat beside him as calmly as before, one hand resting near his glass, his expression unreadable to everyone else. But Julian was close enough to see the truth. Adrian's jaw was tight. His control was not effortless. It was chosen. Carefully. Repeatedly. As if every time Marcus looked at Julian with that wounded pride, Adrian had to decide not to destroy him. Julian lowered his voice. "You shouldn't have done that." Adrian glanced at him. "You asked why. Not whether I should have. That speech will be all anyone talks about." "Good." Julian's lips parted. "Good." Adrian leaned slightly closer, his voice quiet enough that no one else could hear. "They were already talking about you. I changed the subject." Julian looked down at his hands. He hated how much that touched him. He hated that Adrian understood without Julian explaining. Hated that Marcus had spent 2 years beside him, and still never understood how deeply public humiliation cut an Omega who had spent his life being judged for needing love too much. Adrian had known in one night. Or maybe Adrian simply paid attention. That thought was more dangerous than the rest. The dinner ended with polite applause, forced laughter, and Theodore's family pretending the tension had not become sharp enough to cut through the wedding cake. When the guests began standing, Adrian rose first and offered Julian his hand. Julian stared at it for half a second too long. Adrian noticed, of course. "You don't have to take it," Adrian said. That made Julian take it immediately. Because no one had ever given him permission to refuse before. They walked toward the balcony doors together, away from the heavy lights and thicker perfume of the ballroom. Outside, the night air was cool. The city stretched beneath them, full of distant headlights and silver windows. Julian released a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Adrian stood beside him, silent. For once, the silence did not feel like pressure. It felt like shelter. Julian leaned against the stone railing. "You're very good at pretending." Adrian did not answer right away. Then he said, "What makes you think I'm pretending?" Julian's breath caught. The city noise below seemed to fade. He forced a small laugh. Because this started as a favor. Did it? Julian looked at him. Adrian was not smiling. Julian's heart began to beat too hard again. I asked you to come because I needed someone powerful enough to make Marcus regret inviting me. And did it work? Yes, Julian admitted. Then the favor is finished. Julian swallowed. Adrian stepped closer, not trapping him, not touching him, but close enough that Julian could feel the warmth of him in the cold air. If this were only a favor, Adrian said, I would have left after the toast. Julian's fingers curled against the railing. He wanted to ask what Adrian meant. He was afraid to ask. Before he could decide, the balcony door opened behind them. Theodore stepped out. Julian straightened immediately. Theodore looked between them, then gave a faint, embarrassed smile. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Adrian's expression cooled. You did. Adrian, Julian murmured. Theodore lowered his eyes. I deserve that. That surprised Julian. Theodore moved a little farther onto the balcony, keeping a careful distance. Without the bright lights of the ballroom, he looked younger. Not innocent exactly, but tired beneath all the expensive perfection. I wanted to speak to Julian, Theodore said. Adrian did not move. Julian placed a hand lightly on Adrian's sleeve. It's all right. Adrian looked at him. The question was silent again. Are you sure? Julian nodded. Adrian stepped back, but only to the other side of the balcony. Close enough to hear if Julian wanted him to. Far enough to give him dignity. Theodore watched that small exchange with something like envy. Then he turned to Julian. I didn't know, Theodore said. Julian kept his face calm. Didn't know what? How Marcus ended things with you. The words settled heavily between them. Julian looked toward the ballroom windows. Inside, Marcus was surrounded by relatives, smiling like nothing had happened. Now you do, Julian said. Theodore flinched slightly. He told me you both agreed it was best. He said the relationship had been fading for months. Julian's mouth twisted. That sounds like Marcus. Theodore clasped his hands together. I know this is a terrible time to say it. I know I have no right. But when Mr. Crowe spoke, I realized the story I was given may not have been true. Julian studied him. There had been a time when he wanted to hate Theodore. It would have been easier. Cleaner. But standing here now, looking at the Omega Marcus had chosen, Julian did not see a villain. He saw another person trying very hard not to notice the cracks in a beautiful cage. Theodore, Julian said quietly. Marcus is very good at telling stories where he is never cruel. Theodore's eyes shone, though he did not cry. Behind them, Adrian remained silent. Theodore took a breath. Did he make you feel alone even when he was beside you? Julian went still. That question was too specific. Too familiar. Theodore looked away, ashamed by the answer he had already given himself. Julian's anger softened into something sadder. Yes, he said. He did. Theodore nodded once, as if confirming a fear. Then the balcony door opened again. Marcus stepped out. His smile vanished when he saw the three of them. Theodore, he said carefully. Everyone's looking for you. Theodore turned. For the first time that night, his voice was not soft. I was speaking with Julian. Marcus's gaze sharpened. About what? Julian saw Theodore hesitate. Then Adrian moved. Only one step. But Marcus noticed. Everyone did. Adrian did not speak. He did not need to. Theodore lifted his chin. About honesty. Marcus's face hardened. This is our wedding. Yes, Theodore said. That's why I'm hoping you can manage some. The silence that followed felt colder than the night air. Julian stared at Theodore. Marcus looked as if his perfect wedding had begun slipping from his hands. Then his anger turned toward Julian. What did you say to him? Julian's spine stiffened. Adrian's voice cut through the space before Julian could answer. Careful. One word. Marcus stopped. Julian had never heard Adrian sound like that. Low. Controlled. Almost gentle. but it carried a threat so clear even Marcus understood it. Theodore looked at Marcus. "He didn't say anything you shouldn't have told me yourself." Marcus's expression changed quickly. Too quickly. Softness returned. The injured groom. The misunderstood alpha. "Theodore, please," he said. "Not here." Theodore looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked past Marcus and back into the ballroom alone. Marcus watched him go, panic flashing across his face. Julian almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Marcus turned back, his voice low and bitter. "Are you happy now?" Julian met his eyes. For once, the question did not make him shrink. "No," he said. "But I'm free." Marcus looked struck. Adrian stepped beside Julian again. Marcus's eyes moved between them, and the bitterness deepened. "You think he'll love you better than I did?" Julian's throat tightened. Adrian answered before he could. "No." Julian turned to him, startled. Adrian's gaze stayed on Marcus. "I don't intend to love him the way you did." Then Adrian looked at Julian. His voice changed. "I intend to learn how he needs to be loved." Julian forgot the cold. Forgot Marcus. Forgot the entire wedding behind them. All he could feel was the terrifying warmth spreading through his chest. Marcus said nothing. Maybe there was nothing left for him to say. Adrian offered Julian his hand again. This time, Julian did not hesitate. They left the balcony together. But just as they reached the hallway, away from the ballroom and away from Marcus, Julian stopped. Adrian turned. "Julian." Julian looked down at their joined hands. Then up at Adrian. "Why me?" he whispered. Adrian's expression shifted. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Not weak. Not afraid. Just honest. "Because the first time I saw you," Adrian said, "you were crying in an empty conference room and still apologized to me for taking up space." Julian's eyes widened. He remembered that night. He remembered breaking down after Marcus ended the engagement. He remembered hiding on the 24th floor because no one used that room after 7. He had not known Adrian had seen. Adrian's thumb brushed over his hand. "I wanted to tell you then," Adrian continued, "that you were allowed to take up as much space as you needed." Julian's eyes burned. "But I didn't know you," Adrian said. "So I left you my jacket instead." The jacket. The coffee. The quiet looks. The strange gentleness hidden beneath Adrian's cold reputation. Julian took one shaky breath. "Adrian." Before he could finish, a crash echoed from inside the ballroom. Shouts followed. Then Theodore's voice rang out, sharp and broken. "You lied to me?" Julian and Adrian turned at the same time. Through the open doors, they saw Theodore standing in the center of the ballroom with Marcus's phone in his hand. Marcus looked horrified. And every guest was staring. Adrian's hand tightened around Julian's. Because whatever secret Theodore had found, it was no longer buried. End of Part 4. Part 5. For 1 second, no one moved. Theodore stood in the center of the ballroom. Pale under the golden lights, Marcus's phone clutched in his hand like it had burned him. The music had stopped halfway through a note. Guests who had been laughing moments ago, now stared with open shock. Marcus took one step toward him. "Theodore," he said quietly, "give me the phone." Theodore looked at him as if he had become a stranger. "No." The word was small. But it broke something. Marcus's parents rose from their seats. Theodore's mother covered her mouth. A few guests exchanged hungry glances, the kind people wore when tragedy arrived dressed as entertainment. Julian stood frozen near the entrance with Adrian beside him. Adrian's hand remained around his. Firm. Grounding. Julian's first thought was shameful. He was relieved. For once, he was not the broken thing in the room. Then guilt followed immediately, sharp and bitter. Theodore did not deserve to be humiliated at his own wedding, no matter whose place he had taken in Marcus's life. Adrian leaned closer. "Do you want to leave?" Julian looked at him. It would be easy. They could walk away now. Out of the hotel. Into Adrian's car. Away from Marcus, away from old wounds, away from the disaster unfolding beneath the chandeliers. But Julian saw Theodore's trembling hands. He remembered Theodore's question on the balcony. "Did he make you feel alone even when he was beside you?" Julian swallowed. "No," he said. "Not yet." Adrian studied him for half a second, then nodded. No argument. No control. Just trust. Across the ballroom, Marcus reached for the phone. Theodore stepped back. "Don't touch me," Theodore said. The room went colder. Marcus stopped immediately, aware of the audience again. "You're upset. I understand. But this isn't the place." Theodore let out a broken laugh. "That's what you care about?" he asked. "The place?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I care about you." "No," Theodore whispered. "You care about being seen correctly." Julian felt those words in his bones. Marcus looked around the room. His perfect face, his perfect suit, his perfect wedding. All of it began to crack under the weight of so many witnesses. "What did you see?" Theodore's father demanded. Theodore looked down at the phone as if he wished he had never opened it. Then he lifted his eyes to Julian. That glance was enough to make Julian's stomach drop. Adrian felt him tense. "What is it?" Adrian murmured. Julian could not answer. Theodore's voice shook. He never ended things with Julian because he stopped loving him. Marcus went still. Julian's pulse thundered. Theodore continued, each word cutting through the room. "He ended it because my family offered him a business merger. Because marrying me gave him access to Hale Investments." Whispers exploded across the tables. Marcus's mother gasped his name. Marcus stepped forward. "That's not true." Theodore raised the phone. "Your messages say otherwise." Julian felt the floor tilt. He had known Marcus was cruel. He had known Marcus was selfish. But this turned heartbreak into a transaction. Adrian's presence shifted beside him. The air around him changed. Every alpha instinct in him seemed to sharpen. Julian gently squeezed his hand. "Adrian." Adrian looked down at him. Julian shook his head once. "Not here. Not like this." Adrian's expression remained dangerous, but he stayed still for him. Theodore read from the phone, voice cracking. "Julian is sweet, but he has no family power. Theodore is the correct choice." A woman near the front inhaled sharply. Julian's face went numb. He remembered that week. Marcus had been distant, yes. But Julian had thought it was work. He had cooked dinner and waited up. He had bought Marcus's favorite wine. He had worried that he was becoming too needy, too sensitive, too Omega. And Marcus had been deciding whether Julian was profitable enough to keep. Theodore's voice became quieter. "End the engagement cleanly. Make sure Julian doesn't make a scene. Omegas like him become troublesome when embarrassed." Julian's hand slipped from Adrian's. Not because he wanted to let go. Because suddenly he could not feel his fingers. Adrian turned fully toward him. "Julian." Julian heard him, but it sounded far away. Marcus looked at Julian then. Not with apology. With panic. As if Julian's reaction mattered only because everyone else could see it. "Julian," Marcus said quickly. "Those messages were taken out of context." Something inside Julian finally snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It broke with a quiet, clean sound. He walked forward. The guests parted for him. Adrian moved behind him, close but not stopping him. Julian stopped in front of Marcus. For months, he had imagined what he would say if Marcus ever gave him the truth. He had thought he would scream, cry, demand why he had not been enough. But now, standing under the chandeliers, with every ugly answer already exposed, Julian felt strangely calm. "You let me think I was abandoned because I was too hard to love," Julian said. Marcus's lips parted. "Julian." "No," Julian's voice sharpened. "You don't get to use my name like you still know me." Marcus flinched. Theodore lowered the phone slowly, watching him. Julian continued. "I spent months wondering what I did wrong. I replayed every conversation. Every argument. Every time I asked you to come home earlier. Every time I wanted affection, and you made me feel ashamed for needing it." His throat tightened, but he did not stop. "You made me believe my love was a burden." Marcus looked away. That was the first real victory. Julian stepped closer. "But it wasn't my love that was weak. It was yours." The room fell silent again. Marcus whispered, "I made a mistake." Julian almost smiled. A mistake. Such a small word for something that had nearly destroyed him. "No," Julian said. "You made a choice. Then you made me carry the pain of it." Theodore's eyes filled with tears. Julian turned to him. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Theodore blinked. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because no one deserves to find out this way." Theodore's composure broke for 1 second. He pressed his lips together, trying not to cry in front of the entire room. Marcus looked between them, his control slipping further. "Theodore, listen to me. We can talk privately." Theodore looked at his wedding ring. Then he slowly pulled it off. A wave of gasps spread through the ballroom. Marcus stared. "Don't do this." Theodore's voice was quiet but firm. "You already did." He placed the ring on the nearest table. Then he walked away from Marcus. Not running. Not collapsing. Walking. Julian watched him go, and for the first time all night, he felt no desire for revenge. Only grief for the people Marcus had treated like pieces on a board. Marcus turned back to Julian, desperation finally breaking through his pride. "You're enjoying this," he accused. Julian looked at him. "No," he said. "That's the saddest part. I'm not." Marcus's face twisted. Maybe he wanted anger. Anger would have meant Julian still belonged to the wound. But Julian was tired of bleeding for him. Adrian stepped to Julian's side. This time, he did not take his hand in front of everyone. He waited. Julian looked down at Adrian's open palm. Then he placed his hand in it. A choice. His choice. Adrian's fingers closed gently around his. Marcus watched the gesture with something that looked almost like fear. Adrian's voice was low. "We're leaving." No one stopped them. As they walked toward the exit, the ballroom remained fractured behind them. Theodore's family gathered around him near the hall. Marcus's parents argued in harsh whispers. Guests stared after Julian and Adrian, as if they had just witnessed the ending of one story and the beginning of another. Outside the hotel, the night air hit Julian's face. He inhaled too quickly. Then again. His chest hurt. Adrian stood beside him on the steps, silent until Julian's breathing steadied. Only then did he ask, "Do you want me to take you home?" Julian looked at the street ahead. Home meant his apartment. The quiet kitchen. The invitation he would have to throw away. The bed where he had once cried until morning. He shook his head. "Not yet." Adrian nodded once. "Where do you want to go?" Julian laughed weakly. "I don't know." Adrian looked toward his car waiting at the curb. "Then let me take you somewhere you don't have to know anything for a while." Julian should have refused. This night had already become too much. Adrian had already become too important. Every gentle word from him felt like stepping closer to a cliff without seeing the bottom. But when Adrian opened the car door for him, Julian got in. The city blurred outside the window as they drove. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Julian whispered, "Did you know?" Adrian glanced at him. "About the messages?" "No. About me." Julian's voice cracked. "That I was still carrying it." Adrian's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Yes," he said. Julian turned toward him. Adrian kept his eyes on the road. "Because you apologized every time you needed something." Julian looked down. A painful laugh escaped him. "That obvious?" "To me," Adrian said. The answer was simple. Too simple. Julian stared at him through the dim light of the car. "Why?" Adrian finally looked at him when they stopped at a red light. "Because I was watching." Julian's breath caught. The light turned green. Adrian looked back at the road. Minutes later, the car stopped in front of a quiet building overlooking the river. Julian recognized it immediately. Crowe Tower residence. Adrian's private home. Julian's pulse jumped. Adrian. Adrian turned off the engine but did not move. I have guest rooms, he said calmly. A private terrace. Tea. Silence. No expectations. Julian looked at him. No expectations. The words should not have mattered so much. But after a night where everyone wanted something from him, his pain, his reaction, his shame, Adrian offering nothing felt like the safest thing in the world. Julian nodded. Inside, Adrian's home was nothing like he expected. Not cold. Not empty. Quiet, yes. Elegant, yes. But there were books on the tables, a half-finished sketch of a building near the window, and a soft gray blanket folded over the couch. It looked lived in. Adrian led him to the terrace. The river moved below them in dark silver lines. Julian wrapped both hands around the warm tea Adrian gave him. For a long time, they stood without speaking. Then Julian said, "Tonight was supposed to make Marcus regret leaving me." Adrian leaned against the railing beside him. Did it? Julian thought of Marcus's face when Theodore removed the ring. Yes, he said. But that doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. It rarely does. Julian looked at him. You sound experienced. Adrian's expression changed. Just slightly. But Julian saw it. The same hidden wound from earlier. Adrian, he said softly. Who left you cold? Adrian did not answer. The silence stretched. Julian immediately regretted asking. I'm sorry. You don't have to. My father, Adrian said. Julian stilled. Adrian looked out over the river. He taught me early that love was another form of debt. If someone cared for you, they owned part of you. If you needed them, they could name the price. Julian's chest tightened. That's why people say I don't stay, Adrian continued. Because I learned to leave before anyone could collect. Julian set his tea down carefully. And tonight? He asked. Adrian turned to him. The city lights reflected in his eyes. Tonight I didn't want to leave. Julian's heart beat once. Hard. Adrian stepped closer, slowly enough for Julian to move away if he wanted. Julian did not move. Julian, Adrian said, voice low. I know this began because you needed someone to stand beside you. Julian swallowed. But I need you to understand something before this goes any further. What? Adrian's gaze dropped to their almost touching hands. If you ask me to stay now, he said, I will. Julian's breath trembled. Adrian looked back into his eyes. And I don't know if I'll be able to pretend I'm only doing it for tonight. End of Part 5. Part 6. Julian forgot how to speak. Adrian stood in front of him beneath the quiet city sky, the river shining behind him like a dark ribbon of glass. His voice had been calm when he said it, almost too calm, but the words had changed everything. If you ask me to stay now, I will. Julian had been wanted before. At least, he had believed he was. Marcus had wanted his softness when it comforted him. His loyalty when it made him look adored. His silence when it protected his reputation. Marcus had wanted all the parts of Julian that were useful, beautiful, and easy to control. But Adrian was looking at him, as if he wanted the pieces Julian had been taught to hide. The shaking hands. The old hurt. The fear of asking for too much. The lonely Omega, who still apologized before needing anything. Julian's fingers curled around the edge of the terrace railing. You shouldn't say things like that, he whispered. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. Why? Because I might believe you. The answer came out before Julian could stop it. Adrian went still. For a moment, the night between them felt too fragile to touch. Then Adrian said, Good. Julian looked up. Adrian stepped closer, slow and careful. I want you to believe me. Julian's chest ached. He wanted to. That was the terrifying part. He wanted to step forward, bury his face against Adrian's chest, and let the entire ruined night disappear behind the steady warmth of him. He wanted to stop being brave for 5 minutes. He wanted to be held without wondering what it would cost later. But wanting had never protected him. Adrian, Julian said quietly. "Tonight was emotional. You defended me. You saw Marcus hurt me. Maybe this feels bigger than it is because everything happened at once." Adrian listened without interrupting. That made Julian continue. "I don't want to become someone you rescue because I looked broken." Adrian's jaw tightened. Not with anger. With pain. "You are not broken," he said. Julian smiled sadly. "You know what I mean." "I do." Adrian's voice lowered. "And that is why I'm answering carefully." He moved to stand beside Julian instead of in front of him, giving him space again. Julian noticed. He noticed everything Adrian did to make him feel safe, and each small act made his defenses weaker. Adrian looked out over the river. "I didn't come tonight because I pitied you," he said. "I came because when you walked into my office with that invitation, trying to look fearless while your hands shook, I realized I had been waiting for you to ask me for something." Julian turned to him. Adrian's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. "You never do." Julian looked down. "I'm bad at it." "You're trained against it." The words landed softly, but deeply. Julian swallowed. Adrian continued. "At work, when clients demand impossible changes, you apologize before correcting them. When someone interrupts you in meetings, you let them finish before speaking twice as clearly. When your coffee spills because someone bumps into you, you apologize to them." Julian stared. "You noticed all that?" "Yes." "For how long?" Adrian did not look away. "Longer than I should admit." A dangerous warmth moved through Julian's chest. He turned back toward the river, trying to hide it. "You're making this very hard." "What?" "Not falling for you." The silence after that was different. Julian realized what he had said 1 second too late. His face burned. "I didn't mean." Adrian's hand covered his on the railing. Julian stopped breathing. Adrian did not force their fingers together. He only rested his hand there, warm and steady, letting Julian choose whether to pull away. Julian did not. "Don't take it back," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, almost rough. Julian's heart beat painfully fast. "I don't know what I'm ready for," Julian admitted. "Then we don't rush." "You're an alpha billionaire CEO. Don't men like you always rush?" Adrian looked at him. "Men like me are usually idiots." Julian laughed before he could stop himself. It was small. Exhausted. Real. Adrian's eyes changed when he heard it. As if that single laugh had given him something more valuable than any business empire. Julian looked away quickly, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his gaze. Then Adrian's phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then again. The moment shattered. Adrian glanced at the screen, and the softness disappeared from his face. Julian noticed immediately. "What is it?" Adrian did not answer at first. Then he turned the screen toward him. A message from an unknown number. "Tell your Omega to enjoy tonight. By morning, everyone will know why Marcus really left him." Julian's blood went cold. Below the message was an image. A screenshot. Not from Marcus's phone. From an old private message Julian had sent Marcus months ago, during the worst week after their breakup. "Please tell me what I did wrong. I can fix it. I can be less difficult. Just don't make me feel like I meant nothing." Julian stared at the words. He remembered writing them. He remembered sitting on the kitchen floor at 2:14 in the morning, wearing one of Marcus's old shirts, unable to understand how love could disappear without warning. He remembered deleting half the message before sending it, because even then, even broken, he had been afraid of sounding pathetic. Now someone had taken that pain and turned it into a weapon. Adrian locked the phone. Too late. Julian had already seen enough. He stepped back. "Julian." Julian shook his head. The terrace suddenly felt too open. Too bright. Too exposed. "They're going to post it," he whispered. Adrian's voice hardened. "No, they are not." "You don't know that." "I know exactly how to stop it." The cold certainty in his voice should have comforted Julian. Instead, it frightened him. Because for the first time, Julian saw the side of Adrian Crowe the city feared. Not the gentle man who brought tea. Not the alpha who gave space. The CEO who could ruin lives with a phone call. Julian wrapped his arms around himself. Who sent it? Adrian looked at the city. Marcus, possibly. Someone from his family. Someone who wants to control the story before it spreads. Julian laughed bitterly. Of course. Because I can't just be hurt. I have to be embarrassed too. Adrian turned sharply. No. Julian looked at him. Adrian's eyes burned silver in the dark. You were grieving, he said. You begged someone you loved for an answer. That is not shameful. It feels shameful. Because he taught you to see your heart as something humiliating. Julian's eyes stung. Adrian stepped closer, then stopped, clearly fighting the instinct to pull him in. What do you need? Adrian asked. Julian almost broke at the question. Not what should I do? Not who should I punish? What do you need? No one ever asked him that first. Julian took a trembling breath. I need to not be alone tonight. Adrian's expression changed. The careful control in him cracked. Only slightly. But Julian saw it. You won't be, Adrian said. Julian looked at him through blurred eyes. And I need you not to fix everything without asking me. Adrian stilled. For a second, the alpha in him looked ready to resist. Then he nodded. All right. Julian searched his face. You mean that? Yes. Even if you think you know better? Adrian's mouth tightened. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Especially then. Julian let out a shaky breath. Adrian offered his hand. This time, Julian stepped into him instead. Adrian's arms came around him slowly, giving him every chance to change his mind. Julian did not. He pressed his forehead against Adrian's chest and closed his eyes. Adrian held him like he was something precious. Not fragile. Precious. For a few minutes, Julian let himself stop standing on his own. The scent of cedar and rain surrounded him. Adrian's heartbeat was steady beneath his ear. The city moved below them, uncaring and distant, while Julian's world narrowed to warmth, breath, and the strange safety of being held by a man he had known from a distance long before tonight. When Julian finally pulled back, Adrian released him immediately. That made Julian want to stay closer. Can I use your bathroom? Julian asked, wiping his face quickly. I need to look less like a public scandal. Adrian's expression softened. You look like someone who survived a very bad night. That is a polite way of saying terrible. It is an accurate way of saying beautiful. Julian stared at him. Adrian looked almost surprised at himself. Then Julian smiled. Small. Real. Bathroom? He asked again, before his heart did something reckless. Adrian led him inside and showed him the guest suite. The room was elegant and quiet, with soft lamps, pale sheets, and a view of the river. Julian washed his face, then stood in front of the mirror for a long time. His eyes were red. His suit was wrinkled. His hair had lost its careful shape. And somehow, for the first time in months, he recognized himself. Not Marcus's abandoned Omega. Not Adrian's rescued date. Just Julian. Still here. When he stepped back into the hallway, he heard Adrian's voice from the living room. Low. Controlled. Dangerous. I said no action without Julian's approval. A pause. I don't care how easy it would be. Another pause. If anyone publishes those messages, we respond with the truth. Not intimidation. Not threats. The truth. Julian stopped walking. Adrian continued. Prepare everything. But wait. Julian's chest warmed painfully. He had meant it. Even when Julian was not in the room, Adrian had kept his promise. Julian walked into the living room, just as Adrian ended the call. Adrian turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Julian said, You waited. Adrian slipped the phone into his pocket. You asked me to. That usually doesn't stop people. It stops me. Julian's heart hurt in the gentlest way. Before he could answer, Adrian's phone buzzed again. This time, Adrian did not hide the screen. The message had no words. Only a link. Below it, a preview image loaded. Julian's private message. His name. Marcus's name. And a headline already spreading across a gossip account. Billionaire CEO's Omega date begged ex to take him back before wedding scandal. Julian went cold. Adrian's eyes darkened. Then Julian saw the view count rising. Hundreds. Thousands. The story was already public. End of part 6. Part 7. The room became too quiet. Julian stared at the phone in Adrian's hand, watching the view count climb, as if every number were a hand reaching through the screen to touch the most wounded part of him. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became more. The headline sat there, ugly and hungry. Billionaire CEO's Omega date begged ex to take him back before wedding scandal. Julian could not breathe properly. He had imagined public humiliation before. He had feared it. He had survived pieces of it in whispers, pitying looks, and careful questions from people who pretended not to know his life had fallen apart. But this was different. This was his pain turned into entertainment. His weakest message cut from context and dressed up like evidence that he was pathetic. Adrian lowered the phone immediately. "Don't look at it." Julian let out a small, broken laugh. "That won't make it disappear." "No," Adrian said. "But it gives you 1 second to breathe before we decide what to do." The word should have comforted him. It did. But Julian was too overwhelmed to hold on to it. He stepped away from Adrian and pressed both hands over his face. His body wanted to fold in on itself, to become small enough that no headline could find him. The old instinct returned fast. Apologize, hide, explain softly, make it easier for everyone else. Then Adrian said his name. Not loudly. Not with command. Just, Julian. He looked up. Adrian stood several feet away, even though every line of his body showed he wanted to come closer. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was tight. His eyes were burning with a fury he was forcing himself to control. For Julian. Because Julian had asked him not to fix everything without permission. That realization did something strange to Julian's fear. It did not erase it. It gave him a place to stand. Julian wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Who posted it? Adrian looked at the screen again. A gossip account. Anonymous source. Marcus? Possibly. Julian's voice turned hollow. He gave them my message. Adrian's silence was answer enough. Julian looked toward the windows, at the river beyond them, at the city that already had his shame in its mouth. For a moment, he saw himself as the headline wanted him to be. Desperate Omega. Abandoned ex begging for love. Then he remembered standing in front of Marcus beneath the chandeliers and saying, "You don't get to use my name like you still know me." His chest tightened. "Give me the phone," Julian said. Adrian looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," Julian held out his hand. "But give it to me anyway." Adrian handed it over. Julian opened the post. Comments moved too quickly to read. Some mocked him. Some defended him. Some only wanted more details, more pain, more blood. His stomach twisted. Then he stopped reading. He opened his own profile. Adrian moved closer, but still did not touch him. "What are you doing?" Julian's thumb hovered over the screen. "The one thing Marcus never thought I'd do." "What?" Julian looked up at him. "Speak first." Adrian's expression shifted. Something like pride. Julian started recording. His reflection stared back at him from the screen. Red eyes, tired face, suit collar slightly undone. Not perfect. Not polished. Not the kind of image a publicist would approve. Good. He was done looking polished for people who had already decided what his pain meant. Julian pressed record. "My name is Julian Vale," he said, voice shaking only at first. "A private message I sent during one of the lowest moments of my life was posted tonight without my consent." His throat tightened. Adrian stood behind the phone, silent and steady. Julian continued. "Yes, I begged my ex for an answer. I asked what I had done wrong. I asked if I could fix myself enough to be loved. I am not proud of how much I hated myself in that moment. His eyes burned again, but he did not stop. But I am not ashamed of loving someone honestly. I am not ashamed of grieving. I am not ashamed of wanting closure from someone who ended our engagement through an assistant, because another marriage gave him more money and power. Julian's voice grew stronger. The shame belongs to the person who used my heartbreak as a business decision. The shame belongs to the person who kept my private pain, so he could use it when he needed to control the story. He took a breath. And to anyone watching this who has ever begged the wrong person to explain why they stopped loving you, please hear me. That moment does not define your worth. It only proves you were human in front of someone who didn't deserve to see it. Adrian's eyes softened. Julian looked directly into the camera. I was not easy to leave because I was worthless. I was easy to leave because Marcus Elian was never brave enough to love someone without calculating what they could give him. He stopped recording. For a second, he could not move. Then he posted it before fear could talk him out of it. The silence after felt enormous. Julian handed the phone back to Adrian with trembling fingers. I think I'm going to be sick. Adrian took the phone, set it on the table, and finally stepped closer. Can I hold you? Julian closed his eyes. That question almost broke him more than the scandal. He nodded. Adrian wrapped his arms around him, and Julian sank into the warmth without pretending he did not need it. His hands clutched the front of Adrian's shirt. Adrian held him firmly, one palm against his back, the other cradling the back of his head. Not possessive for an audience. Protective in private. I sounded ridiculous, Julian whispered. No, Adrian said. You have to say that. I don't. Julian let out a weak laugh against his chest. You're impossible. I've been told. The phone began buzzing on the table. Once. Again. Then continuously. Julian stiffened. Adrian reached for it, glanced at the screen, and his eyebrows lifted slightly. What? Julian asked. Adrian turned the phone toward him. Julian's video was spreading faster than the gossip post. Comments filled the screen. He's right. Grief isn't shameful. Marcus Elian is finished. Whoever posted that private message is disgusting. Adrian Crowe standing behind him silently? That alpha is in love. Julian stared at the last comment for too long. Adrian cleared his throat. Julian looked up. For the first time all night, Adrian Crowe looked almost caught. A laugh escaped Julian before he could stop it. Small, wet, exhausted. But real. Adrian's mouth softened. Then his own phone rang. The name on the screen made his expression harden. Marcus Elian. Julian's smile vanished. Adrian looked at him, silently asking. Julian inhaled. Then he said, Answer it. Adrian accepted the call and put it on speaker. Marcus's voice came through immediately, sharp with panic. Take the video down. Julian's body went cold. Adrian's voice was calm. No. You don't understand what this will do. Julian stepped closer to the phone. No, Marcus, he said. You don't understand what you already did. There was silence. Then Marcus spoke softer. Julian. Please. I made mistakes, but this will destroy me. Julian looked at Adrian. Then at the city beyond the glass. Once, Marcus's pain would have controlled him. Not anymore. You should have thought of that, Julian said, before you tried to destroy me. Marcus breathed unevenly. Then his voice changed. Lower. Crueler. If I go down, I won't go alone. Adrian went still. Julian's pulse jumped. Marcus continued. Ask Adrian why he really agreed to be your date. Ask him what deal my father offered Crowe Industries 3 weeks ago. Julian slowly turned toward Adrian. Adrian's face had gone unreadable. Marcus laughed once, bitter and broken. You thought he chose you out of nowhere? Julian, you poor thing. Powerful alphas don't do favors for free. The call ended. The room felt suddenly colder. Julian looked at Adrian, heart pounding. Adrian, he whispered. What is he talking about? Adrian did not answer fast enough. And that silence terrified Julian more than any headline. End of Part 7. Part 8. Julian had learned to fear silence. With Marcus, silence had always meant punishment. It meant affection being withdrawn until Julian apologized for something he did not understand. It meant unanswered messages. Cold dinners. A hand slipping away in public just slowly enough for no one else to notice. Now Adrian was silent in front of him. And every old fear in Julian's body woke up at once. The city lights shimmered behind the glass walls of Adrian's living room. The phone lay on the table between them, Marcus's cruel accusation still echoing in the air. Ask Adrian why he really agreed to be your date. Julian's throat tightened. Say something, he whispered. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the cold CEO mask was gone. What remained was worse. Guilt. There was a deal, Adrian said. Julian's chest hollowed. Adrian took 1 step forward, then stopped himself. 3 weeks ago, Marcus's father came to Crowe Industries. He wanted my company to support the Ellie and Hale merger publicly. A partnership announcement. Investment backing. Something that would make the wedding look like the beginning of an empire. Julian felt the room tilt again. And you agreed? No. The answer came fast. Firm. Julian searched his face. Adrian continued. I refused before I knew anything about you and Marcus. The numbers were dishonest. Their proposal depended on inflated assets and hidden debt. I told them Crowe Industries would not attach its name to a polished lie. Julian tried to breathe. Then why did Marcus say that? Because after I refused, his father tried another angle. Adrian's jaw tightened. He mentioned you. Julian went still. Me? He said Marcus had an abandoned Omega X working under my corporate umbrella. He suggested that if I cared about avoiding workplace scandal, I should encourage you to stay away from the wedding. Julian's face went cold. Adrian's voice lowered. He thought your pain was something he could trade. For a moment, Julian could not speak. Then a humorless laugh slipped out of him. Of course he did. Julian. No, Julian held up a hand, not because he hated Adrian, but because he needed space to stand inside the truth. Let me understand this. Adrian stayed still. Julian's voice shook. Marcus's family tried to use me as leverage. You knew they were afraid I might show up. Then 2 days later, I walked into your office and asked you to be my date. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Adrian's silence hurt. Not because it was empty. Because it was an answer. Julian stepped back. The distance between them felt larger than the room. Adrian's hands curled slightly at his sides. I should have. Yes, Julian said. You should have. I didn't want tonight to become another burden before it even began. Julian's eyes burned. That wasn't your choice to make. Adrian lowered his head. No, he said. It wasn't. That stopped Julian. Marcus had never surrendered an argument that easily. He had twisted, explained, softened, blamed timing, blamed pressure, blamed Julian's sensitivity. Adrian did none of that. He stood there and let Julian be right. Somehow, that made Julian's anger harder to hold. But not impossible. You promised you wouldn't decide things for me, Julian said. I made that promise after I had already failed you. The honesty cut deeper than any excuse would have. Julian looked away. The phone buzzed again, but neither of them moved. The city outside was beginning to change. Somewhere beyond the horizon, night was thinning toward morning. Julian felt exhausted down to his bones. Were you watching me because of them? He asked quietly. Adrian's face changed instantly. No. How do I know? Adrian took the question like he deserved it. You don't, he said. Not yet. Julian swallowed. Adrian continued, voice rougher now. I noticed you long before Elian's father came to my office. I noticed you because you were brilliant in meetings and apologetic in hallways. Because you looked lonely even when surrounded by people. Because once, after a client dismissed your entire design, You waited until they left and rebuilt the proposal better than theirs in 40 minutes. Julian's lips parted slightly. Adrian looked at him like every word mattered. I noticed you because you were kind to assistants, drivers, interns, and people who could do nothing for your career. I noticed you because you returned my jacket folded better than it was when I gave it to you. I noticed you because after Marcus broke you, you still held doors open for other people. Julian's tears finally slipped. Adrian's voice softened. I agreed to be your date because you asked me. I stayed because I wanted to. I defended you because you deserved it. And I kept the truth from you because I was afraid if I told you, you would think tonight began as strategy. Julian wiped his cheek. Did it? Adrian looked directly at him. No. But I understand why you have to ask. The answer settled into the room. Quiet. Imperfect. Real. Julian looked at the phone on the table. What happens now? Adrian followed his gaze. Now we tell the rest of the truth. If you want to. Julian stared at him. You're asking. I'm learning. Despite everything, Julian almost smiled. Almost. He took a slow breath. Then tell it. Adrian picked up his phone and called his legal director. His voice changed. Controlled, precise, dangerous in a way that no longer frightened Julian, because this time Adrian's power was not moving over him. It was standing beside him. Within 20 minutes, Crowe Industries released a statement. It did not threaten. It did not dramatize. It simply confirmed that the Elian family had approached Crowe Industries for a business partnership, that the proposal had been rejected due to financial concerns, and that any attempt to use a private individual's emotional distress as leverage would be documented and addressed. Then Theodore posted. His statement was shorter. I will not marry a man who builds his future on lies and calls it love. Julian Vale deserved the truth. So did I. By sunrise, the story had changed completely. Marcus was no longer the groom abandoned by scandal. He was the alpha exposed by two omegas he had underestimated. Julian sat on Adrian's couch wrapped in the soft gray blanket, watching the city wake through the windows. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt empty in a clean way. Like a storm had passed through him, and taken the broken furniture with it. Adrian placed a cup of tea on the table beside him. Then he stepped back. Always giving space now. Always waiting. Julian looked up. You can sit. Adrian's eyes softened. He sat beside him, leaving a careful distance. Julian looked at that distance and sighed. You know, learning is good, he said. But you don't have to sit like I'm a frightened cat. Adrian blinked. Then, slowly, his mouth curved. It was the closest thing to a real smile Julian had seen from him. Julian's heart warmed against his will. Adrian moved closer, still careful. Better? A little. Julian leaned his head against Adrian's shoulder. Adrian went completely still. Julian closed his eyes. You can breathe. Adrian exhaled. A quiet laugh slipped out of Julian. For the first time in a long time, the laugh did not feel borrowed from someone braver. It felt like his. They sat like that as morning filled the room. No dramatic promises. No rushed declarations. Only warmth, tea, silence, and the strange safety of beginning again. After a while, Adrian spoke. I have one more thing to apologize for. Julian opened one eye. That sounds dangerous. It is. Julian lifted his head. What? Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out the cream-colored wedding invitation. Julian stared at it. You kept that? I took it from your hand in my office and never gave it back. Julian gave him a tired look. Why? Adrian turned it over. On the back, written in Adrian's clean handwriting, were 2 lines. Julian Vale walked in to prove he was not alone. I walked out knowing I never wanted him to be alone again. Julian's breath caught. Adrian looked almost embarrassed. I wrote it after you fell asleep in the car for 5 minutes, he said. I intended to throw it away. Julian took the invitation carefully. For so long, that paper had felt like proof of everything he had lost. Now it felt like proof of something else. A door he had walked through broken. and left through held. Julian looked at Adrian. "I'm not ready to call this love," he said softly. Adrian nodded. "I know. But I think—" Julian's fingers tightened around the invitation. "I think I'm ready to let it become something." Adrian's eyes warmed. "I can wait." Julian smiled faintly. "You say that like you're patient." "I can become patient." "For me?" Adrian looked at him, as if the answer had always been obvious. "For you." Julian believed him. Not completely. Not blindly. But enough to move closer. Enough to place his hand over Adrian's. Enough to choose something that did not begin with begging, or shame, or fear. Adrian turned his hand and laced their fingers together. No audience. No revenge. No Marcus watching from across a ballroom. Just the two of them in the morning light. Julian rested his head against Adrian's shoulder again. This time, Adrian did not go still. He leaned back gently, as if allowing himself to belong to the moment too. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, Julian finally stopped feeling like someone left behind. And when Adrian pressed a soft kiss to the top of his hair, careful and quiet, and asking nothing in return, Julian closed his eyes and smiled. Because for once, he was not trying to prove he was worth staying for. Someone had already stayed. End of part 8. And that was the end of Julian and Adrian's story, at least for now. Sometimes love does not arrive when we are perfect, healed, or ready. Sometimes it finds us in the middle of heartbreak, when we are still shaking, still doubting ourselves, and still learning how to believe we deserve more. Julian walked into that wedding to prove he was not alone. But he walked out with someone who chose to stay, not for revenge, not for appearance, but because he saw Julian's heart and refused to let it be treated like something weak. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me, do you think Adrian fell for Julian before the wedding night, or did he realize it only when Julian finally stood up for himself? Your comments help this story reach more people who love emotional BL romances, so write your thoughts below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.